Um, there we go. Okay, let's read out together. Let's read out loud together. On Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. Our guide, and yeah, let us just receive the life you're giving to us today. Amen. You may be seated. Isn't that cool that well, I guess we don't have priests at the vineyard, but there was bread just made that only the priest could eat. Y'all should just try that one day. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I was very hopeful today that Sean would bring me a cup of coffee because he's always having coffee with him. And the one day I needed him to bring coffee, he said, actually, today I'm not taking any. Or anyway. Do holiness in the prescribed way. For even just one day, the Messiah would come. And so when they saw such things, they were very upset because they were thinking, you are the reason the Messiah hasn't come. They obviously didn't think that the one walking by them is a Messiah. And so you can see why they were often upset with Jesus around the Sabbath. Because they're going, if only we kept all the rules for one day, the Messiah would come. But then you see that Jesus seems to think that God loves people than he loves his own rules. Okay, so the Pharisees had extra rules. Israel in general had extra rules over and above the ones that they had in the books of Moses. Yet God, according to Jesus, seems to love people way more than he loves his own rules. See, an example I've used here before, I borrowed it from somewhere else, that no one has a bunch of rules and then says, now I only need children so that they can keep the rules. It's often you have children and then you realize this one's going to break this TV, and so you have a bit of rules. You start with people you love, and then you go, okay, what are the boundaries I need for them to live by so that they grow up in the right way? It's the same thing with God. He loves people, he loves you, he loves creation, and then, okay, formation is necessary. Here is how to live. God will always love people more than he loves even his own rules. And so the last 2 weeks of another series that we were doing, I kept saying that our acts in a certain time. So a Sabbath is one of the practices I've often said, and I keep repeating it, that following Jesus is way more than agreeing with certain creeds. They're going, I love Jesus, I kind of like Jesus. Following Jesus means living your life in a certain way. It involves your body, it involves your time, it involves your resources. It is way more than going, I am a believer, great. A pastor called James, he was writing to the church in Jerusalem, said something that if I said it without telling you it's from the Bible, you wouldn't like me. Because he said, even demons believe. So it's not enough. James said it, not me. Anyway. And so following Jesus involves certain practices, practicing the way of Jesus. And often these practices can be countercultural because the things you do something to you. You're being formed into a certain someone. The only question is who. And one of those practices is the practice of the Sabbath. And I need to say, the thing about the practices, they're not an end to themselves. No one should go, I read the Bible 5 times a day, and I pray, and then I fast 7 times a week. That's not the point. The practices only serve to help us create time and space in our life to be with God. They are a means to an end. They are means to an end. They only help us create time and space to be with God. Or as someone I follow and respect said, if you think doing spiritual disciplines will make God love you more, too late, he already loves you. But they will help you live in God's love. Because that's sometimes where the problem is. And so we'll talk about one of those spiritual disciplines called Sabbath in the next couple of weeks. And some of you might be curious or even apprehensive, if we're honest, when you hear the word Sabbath, because the only times we've heard of Sabbath is when we're reading the Bible, and then we're okay with that. And then when we're talking about Jews, and we're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And then when we're talking about other not just Jews, but several communities of faith that keep the Sabbath, and we're like, I'm not sure about that. And so some of you might even be apprehensive, and it's okay. We'll journey through that together. Now, what the word itself means is it's a translation from the Jewish word, from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which simply means to stop. In its simplest form, and we'll talk about other theological invitations of that, but just in its original invitation, it simply means to stop, to cease, to be done. And it's about stopping all work, ceasing the things we do, to be done with working, to be done with production, just to rest. That's what the Sabbath is, to begin with. Now, and one of the things we do when we're studying Scripture, we go to the very beginning of when it was first mentioned, or things like that. And so I want to read, just for us, Genesis 1. I'll read verse 28 and 31, and then chapter 2, verse 1 to 3. Again, we're jumping into the middle of the creation story. So God has been working. He's been creating. He's been creating. And now we're towards the very end. He's created human beings. And this is what it says. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he was doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all his work of creating that he had done. Okay, so the first Sabbath is the foundation for the Sabbath, for anything we could think about the Sabbath. And God is resting. Now, I want us to catch a few things. We've jumped into the middle of the story, like I said. Each day ended. The first part of the story that we haven't read today, each day ended with God saying, "It is good." He would do a bit of creation and go, "I like this stuff. It's good." He'd create the fish and go, "Piranhas. Wow, good." Then he'd create animals, and then a mosquito pops up. I'm like, "It is good." That's why I tell you, we don't always agree with God, but we've been called to follow and love him, and he is Lord. Anyway, and then at the very end, God stops and rests. Why? He looked at everything and saw it is very good. God is not stopping to rest because he was tired. He's stopping from his creation work because he is delighted. Did you catch that? God isn't stopping to rest because he's tired. He loves what he has done. And God isn't stopping to rest because there's nothing else to do. We know that creation continued. Jesus said, "My Father is always working." So, of course, there was more work. God isn't stopping to rest because there's no work to do. He's stopping to rest because he is delighted. God is not stopping to rest because he's lazy. Like, I'll get on it someday. It's not some sort of procrastination. God is stopping to rest because he is delighted. He is very pleased with what he has made. He's very pleased with what he has made. And another thing I want us to realize, that this is a poem describing the rhythm of creation. And even in the act of God stopping to rest, it's part of creation, and he is therefore creating into the rhythm of creation rest. But it's rest out of delight. There's a rhythm There's a rhythm here, and it's rest out of delight, rest out of delight, rest out of delight. Now, God himself modeled it. God himself modeled it and baked it into the fabric of creation. Because some of you might hear this and say, you don't get it. I am an extrovert. I need at least 100 people a day, and we've got to be moving at this speed to feel alive. Well, guess what? God rested. Or some of you might be thinking, well, you don't get it. I'm better off if there's always something happening. I've got to be doing something. God rested. Well, I just had a baby and God rested. Sarah, God rested. Well, I just started this new business, and I think I've got a chance. I could make it. God rested. Well, I'm a very important person. People look for me. Do you realize? If my phone goes off, the world could burn. God rested. I'm the worship pastor at Trinity Vineyard. Do you realize that? George, God rested. This is a very busy season in my life. I'm going to rest. Oh, but I haven't finished my work. Yeah. But I don't like how my work is done yet. Yes, you see, God rested. He models it and he bakes it into the rhythm of creation. Do you catch the drift? God rested. Now, I also recognize, and we'll tackle this a bit more, that because of the struggles of our economy, because of economic oppression that is just in the system of the world, that some people don't own their time. Don't call your boss and say, the pastor said, God rested. But you could negotiate with them. So that's a reality, and we'll talk about that, because as a community, we should learn to provide places of rest for those who cannot get it. I also realize that some of us, it's just pride. I met someone who said to me, oh, no, I can't stop. I'm important. I realize that some of us don't rest because we don't have the information. We just don't realize that it's essential for us, but it's also part of our worship. I realize that some of us are apprehensive because of our religious baggage. And, if I'm honest with you, I never heard anyone speak about the Sabbath in all my years of being in church, and that's all my life, until recently. And I'm sure for some of you, it's the truth. It's the story. Nobody ever talked about Sabbath in our Sunday churches. And then I also realized some of us don't like the groups we know keep the Sabbath. But speaking about the groups that keep the Sabbath, do you know that a study was done on one of the groups that keep the Sabbath, one of the Christian communities that keep the Sabbath, and they were found to be on average happier, and that they live on average 11 years longer. Yes. And then the doctor that did this research said, he found that every time committed to the Sabbath pretty much adds 1 year to your life. And then if you add that together in the course of life expectancy of any place, it then becomes 10 to 12 years more. So he theorized that, keeping the Sabbath prolongs your life. Just remember that phrase, keeping the Sabbath prolongs your life. And so, Christians have debated long, people much smarter than me. I am not that smart. I borrow a lot of things from very many people, but there are people a lot smarter than me. They've been studying this stuff, and they end up on different sides of the debate, and they all love Jesus, yet still, I think it's worth talking about it. I think it's worth saying, okay, what could God be saying here? And, the question is always, did Jesus, we're now under grace. Do we need to keep the Sabbath? Did Jesus stop the Sabbath or what? Well, here's the point. Okay? So we'll lift off from there. Number one, God did. Okay? God stopped and rested. Jesus kept the Sabbath. I don't think there's anyone who could argue that Jesus didn't keep the Sabbath. Jesus kept the Sabbath. Guess what? The apostles kept the Sabbath. The early church kept the Sabbath. Now, Jesus famously said, again, I'm leaning on Jesus, because if I said it, it might sound rude. Because Jesus then said, a servant is not better than his master. So if he did it, who are you not to? Jesus kept the Sabbath. God kept the Sabbath. The apostles kept the Sabbath. The early church kept the Sabbath. It was only centuries later that things began to shift around the Sabbath. So, if he did, who are we not to? Now, the Gospels tell us the story of the life of Jesus. And I want us to note something very interesting. You know, when Jesus was crucified, taken down the tree, there were certain burial rites that would be done for family and friends that have died, by family and friends to one who's died. And we know from the story that they couldn't do it, they had to do it on Sunday morning. That's when they realized that he had been risen. Do we know why? It says, and then it was the Sabbath. Like, you would think that this is the one day Mary could tell God, okay, I can't keep the Sabbath today. Jesus has just died. You would think this is the one day Mary could say, God, your own son is dead. You would think this is the one day they'd say, come on, God, this was my friend and my master. You'd think this is the one day they'd go, well, we don't have to keep the Sabbath. After all, he said he was the Lord of the Sabbath. Guess what? The apostles kept it, and they didn't go to Jesus' burial site to perform the final rites. That's how ingrained and deep it was, even for the followers of Jesus. 2, it's baked into the very rhythm of creation. Now, if you've paid attention, nature has a rhythm. The life around us has a rhythm. Seasons come in a rhythmic way, right? We have, and I know things are changing because of global warming, but we have a rainy season and a dry season. A rainy season and a dry season, short rains and then long rains. In temperate climates, there's a predictable winter, summer, spring. Totally the wrong order. Tells you I live in Kenya. Your own body has a rhythm. You breathe in and you breathe out. Try breaking that rhythm and you might die, right? Your heart beats in a rhythm. Like so many other things that we could talk from on stage happen in a rhythm. Maybe we could, I don't know. But if you've noticed, life around us has a rhythm. Everything in nature has a rhythm. And when we go against the rhythms of life, we're bound to get hurt. When we go against the rhythms of life, we're bound to get hurt. This one's going against the rhythm. So God has built into the rhythm of creation work and rest. A rhythm of work and rest. And it looks like 6 on, 1 off. 6 on, 1 off. And so, to be clear, work is important. And next year we hope to do a series on the theology of work, because work is a gift from God. And we were designed to be like our Father, who is always working. Work is a gift from God, and it is also important to rest. And once that rhythm is off balance, something goes wrong, right? I say get hurt because we know very well that when you don't rest enough, things go wrong, because it negatively impacts your body. Some people just drop. Why? They've been so fatigued, their body stopped. If a human being goes, I think it's 12 or 14 days without sleep, they die. Like we were built for a certain rhythm, and when we go against that rhythm, something goes wrong. Even noise, if your blaster continues noise for a certain amount of time, or what was it, you actually go mad. Right? Lack of rest has an impact on our body, our mind, and our emotions. We know friends who are physically ill because they don't rest. We know many friends who doctors looked at them. I remember one time being in college and I was rushed to hospital and then the doctor looked at me, asked me what was going on, and he just said, "You need to go and rest." I was so disappointed. Doctors just recommend rest, And here's the reality. You're not loving. You're very irritable when you're tired. So how are we going to be like Jesus when we're tired and unrested? Yet the way of Jesus, the epitome of the way of Jesus is that we become people of love. This is how big the rhythm is. Now, in Genesis, there's an interesting... So Genesis, the first section of Genesis is written like a poem. And so think of it like a song. It was evening and it was day, the first day. It was evening and it was day, the second day. It was evening and it was day. And it continues, and then, behold, the seventh day. It's like there's a rhythm to it, and it's leading up to this one day. There's a rhythm to it, and if you think about it, what do you do in the evening? You sleep. Blessing. Blessing is about being in the life-giving rule and reign of God. Blessing is life-giving. It's not about money, it's not about a new car. While all those can be included, that's not what blessing is. Blessing is about receiving and experiencing the life of God. And so then God blesses human beings. You know what He's saying to you and me? You and me can bring God's life. We can partner with Him to bring creation under His rule and reign, and that is life-giving. So He said, go, rule and reign. What is He saying? Go bring all of creation under my blessing. Go bring life to all of my creation. And then He blesses the Sabbath. It should ring the same thing. He's therefore saying that there is a time I have set aside that has the ability to give life. It's a gift. It's a gift. So remember what we said before when we talked about the research on the communities that keep the Sabbath. The Sabbath has ability to give life to you, even quite literally. Two things are called blessed. The Sabbath, human beings, and the Sabbath. And I want you to go back to what we read this morning when Jesus says the Sabbath was made for man. This is why. Jesus knows that God blessed the Sabbath so you and I can find life. God blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. The Sabbath is a gift. And this is why, if human beings are created on the sixth day, so what is the first thing they ever do? Rest. Our story begins with rest. It's a gift. We don't earn rest. We don't get rewarded with rest, because so many of us, when we get to the weekend, you see, I'm separating the weekend from the Sabbath, two different things. We'll talk about it. When we get to the weekend, we are so tired, we're going, I have earned this, right? The rest that God is inviting you to is a gift He gives you before you ever start doing any work. It's a gift He gives you before you ever start doing any work. We start from rest. We look forward to rest so that we can have strength to work. And all of work is joining God in what He is doing. We have a habit of secularizing and spiritualizing work. I only join God when I'm leading worship. I only join God when I'm serving tea at the church. No, when you're teaching, when you're raising your kids, when you're driving someone. Work is a gift from God, but we start to work from a place of rest. So I'm getting ready to go on a sabbatical, and it's just a prolonged, Rose is laughing. It's a prolonged Sabbath. And for me, it's a gift. And there's so much I had hoped to have accomplished. This is why we didn't do the fasting series, because I thought I had 10 weeks, and then I looked at the calendar, I'm like, what? I'm going. There's so much I still hope to have done. And so it's easy for the enemy to put anxiety in me. Well, but you didn't do this, you didn't meet so-and-so, you didn't visit so-and-so, and oh, what will happen with this? But it's also time for me to realize, no, God gives this to me as a gift because we work from rest. We work from rest. So trusting God means receiving the gifts he gives you. Not because you say, I haven't earned it. I haven't worked enough. I haven't accomplished. I haven't. No, it's a gift. And that's what Sabbath is. So I am teaching myself to lean into that truth enough until it forms me deeply. You see what I started with saying, the things we do something to us. I am not yet at the place where I can say, you know what, I completely work from rest. But the reason we step into these things is that we do them over and over again, and then maybe when I'm 60, I'll go, yeah, I am not all about my work. Lastly, it's a command. Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, all of it. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, or your daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and all that is within them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. It's not just a good idea, God commands it. It's not just a good idea, it is one of the commandments. And guess what? The Sabbath forms the biggest chunk of the commandments. In the discourse, in the conversation around the commandments, the conversation around the Sabbath takes 35% of the whole thing. It seems that for God, keeping the Sabbath is as important as, do you remember the commandments? Don't lie, don't steal, don't murder, don't worship any other gods, don't covet your neighbor's spouse or property. For God, keeping the Sabbath is as important as those. He commands it. When God redeemed the nation of Israel as part of the ongoing story of redemption, he gave them these 10 commandments, or what they originally called the 10 sayings. And one of them is keep the Sabbath. It's the only practice we'll ever talk about that is actually commanded. Keep the Sabbath. A couple of things. I want us to remember two things as we start talking about it as a commandment. One, it is a gift before it's a commandment. God gave us the Sabbath so that it gives life to us. It is a gift before it's commanded. Two, it's a rhythm in creation. And I think that's why the initial command of the Sabbath is remember, because we can easily forget. Remember. Remember to stop and rest. Isn't that cool? Imagine someone you work for tells you a bunch of things you do and says, and remember to stop and eat. Like, that's kind of cool. Hey, remember to go home and rest. That's kind of cool. This is God saying, the command is remember, because it is easy to forget. But let us talk about the commandments for a moment. Because so many of us struggle with that because we go, oh, well, we're under the dispensation of grace. And I get it, it's true. Yet, the conversation is more nuanced than that. You know, Jesus did not abolish the Sabbath. In fact, Jesus famously said, I am not here, Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, everyone who sets aside the least of these commands and teaches others to do accordingly will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. At least he didn't say you won't come in. You see, nobody ever goes, well, we are under grace, so I can do a bit of murder. Nobody ever says, well, we're under grace, so I can do a little bit of lying, though we often do. Nobody is ever saying, well, we're under grace, so I can do a bit of coveting here and there. A little bit of da-da-da. You remember that song? But when it comes to the Sabbath, we all go, we're under grace. Maybe there's something else going on there. Now, there are over 600 other rules that the rabbis and traditions had over and above what was commanded. And so the interaction we see Jesus having with them is that hey, nothing is ever more important than the children of God. The problem is that they had so many rules. Our problem is that we have none at all. We don't have a way of keeping the Sabbath. What Jesus' life, death, and resurrection said is that we owe no payment anymore. He's paid it all. He's paid for even the times we don't keep the Sabbath. That's why someone like Saul, who went around overseeing the murder of people, could come in. He's paid it all. You don't ever have to, well, you never could really, but you cannot earn your way into God's kingdom. And so Jesus has opened the door to everyone. So even invitations to keep the Sabbath is about who you're becoming. Like I said, don't for a moment think you could get God to love you by doing spiritual disciplines or following or being obedient to Scripture. Too late. He already loves you. But if you want to learn how to live in God's love, you're invited to step in. Now, remember, the story of humanity begins with rest. You're called to live out of God's rest. You're called to live out of God's rest. You're called to stop and rest. And when we stop and rest, now, there is always stuff to do. There's always one more email. There's always one more trip. There's always one more show. There's always something. You're called to stop and rest. You're called to stop and rest. There will always be work tomorrow. Have you ever realized even on the week you're very pleased with how much work you've done? You start the next week and it's all, you start over again. Some of you are fond of clearing all your emails. What happens right after you go, done? You close your computer, you wake up the next morning, 600 more emails. Why are people looking for you? And so, do you realize human beings come into the story after God had been working? What does it tell you? God's got this. You just need to learn to trust that God's got this. You are so concerned with your work, and God is inviting you to stop and rest because God's got this. He will do it. You start with rest. It's a powerful way of saying, I trust God. But what if things go wrong? I know. What if things go wrong? Trust me. It's always my cue. It's a powerful way of saying we trust God. It's almost like the story of the Hebrew Scriptures, right? In Genesis and in the Psalms and even in their way of living, the day started in the evening, not the morning. The day started with evening and then rest. That's why Sabbath for in Judaism starts on Friday evening into Saturday. Why? we start with rest. We start with rest. We start with rest. That is the rhythm that we've been called to. It's a way of learning to trust God. It's a way of saying, God, teach my body, my mind, my emotions to trust you. Teach me to know that you got this. That you got this. It's almost like right from the story in Genesis, God was breathing into creation grace, sanctification by grace. That you don't have to do it, I have given it to you. That you don't have to earn rest, I am giving you rest. Sanctification by grace from the beginning. And so if you believe that we're living in a dispensation of grace, that the easiest way to do that is to learn to Sabbath. Because you're saying, I don't make this work. God does. You're saying, hey, I'm not the one who provides. God does. You're saying, my business doesn't do well because of me. God does. What I'm saying with my sabbatical is, this church is God's. It's not mine. God wants to remind you, by stopping and resting, He wants to remind you that you are not what you do. You are who you are loved by. You see, oftentimes when we meet people, we ask one question. What do you do? Baked into our psyche is this false idea that what we produce says something about us. Well, I met a couple of pastors, and they, conversations sometimes around pastors is very crazy. It's like, oh, I lead this, and we've built this, and we have these number of people. What does it tell us? We often define ourselves by what we do, by the metrics of our production. And God, through the Sabbath, turns that upside down and says, no, you are who you are loved by. You're not what you produce. I remember the first time I tried keeping the Sabbath, I was angsty. I was waiting for 3:30 to come so that I opened my emails, and probably no one emailed me that day, but I was just like, how can I even do this? Why? There was a lie in there that, you know what? I'm important. And these emails make me feel important. But God is telling me, no. You are who I say you are. Many of us don't realize just how addicted we are to work. Try stopping for one day and you will realize your body itself will begin to ache. Like, I gotta show up at the office. What is it saying? That there's a lie in there, that God is inviting you to partner with Him to get it out, because you can stop and rest. And it will not just happen. Like every other practice we've talked about, Sabbath doesn't just happen. You've got to plan for it. You've got to put boundaries around it. You've got to schedule it. And you've got to fight for it. Fighting for it looks like this. When people say, but Mom, now you won't take us? Yes, I will not. When people say, but you're my friend, how can you not show up? I'm sorry, I don't do that on this day. You've got to fight for it, because people will make you feel guilty sometimes. You got to fight for it because sometimes you will make yourself feel guilty, because you're just realizing, oh my word, if only I was online this day, I would have gotten that email and I would have gotten that job. You got to fight for it. But listen. As we have this conversation, knowledge does not always equal transformation. With the millennials, Gen Zs, we like thinking therapy is a big thing. We go to therapy and go, and then there's an explosion of podcasts everywhere. There's information everywhere. And sometimes you just hear the things people are sharing. You're like, you really got on the platform for this? Anyone can be a podcast, well, no. Dave would disagree with me. But so many people can be podcasting, because all you need to do is go, yes, deep, And but we've gotten to a place where we think just because you know, it's changed you. No. You've got to reflect. you've got to enact if it's going to do something to you. So it's not enough to go, yeah, I think it's cool information. You've got to learn to stop and rest. So again, if the band could come on stage as we finish. So I've mentioned it, and I'll mention it a couple times for different reasons. I am leaving in a couple of weeks. And I've noticed that my team told me, you always disappear, and then some people in the church are worried. Most of those times I've gone for work. And after serving you and with so much joy, it gives me so much love, life and love, because I know that I am loved here, no doubt. It's a delight for me to stop all work. I'm not going to be pastoring. I'm not going to be speaking. There's so many nice things involved where I'm going to go. It's time for me to stop and rest. And not because the work is done. I'm not quitting. Not yet. Not because there's nothing else to do. This is me trusting God that He's got this church. And while I'm gone, this is why this part is important. For just general things, Sean and George will be co-leading. So don't email me, don't text me, don't message me. Just find George, find Sean, and then we'll tell you the rest of who's doing what in the next couple weeks. And this is, like I said, this is how we say we trust God. I'm also saying I trust God for my provision. Because, work gets paid. So this is me trusting God for my provision, for where I'm going to be. That's what rest does. We remind ourselves that it is God who provides. God is the ultimate provider. This is me trusting God that He will provide for your spiritual needs. And to learn to surrender the anxiety that comes with, and then who did what? Atishon said what? Tell him we'll talk on Monday. No, we've never had that. But you can imagine, when sometimes when we're defined, our identity is defined by what we do, that's what happens. This is me trusting God with everything that could go right and could go wrong while I'm away. And I'm inviting you to trust God with me. So, what is the Sabbath? I just want to crunk this into a small moment. It's a whole day. And it's not a day off. Okay, I just want to... Because often when we take a day off, what do? We go to the store, we go to the bank, we go to we do errands. The Sabbath is not a day off. And it's not a day to binge on Netflix. And it's not a day to get lost on Instagram. Okay? It's actually a day where you stop all work. And so that changes from person to person. If I go to the gym on the Sabbath, it's not work, because I never go to the gym. It's enjoyable. I'm going, oh my goodness, this is nice. But for some people, like Mbunge, my roommate, shouldn't go to the gym. He wakes up 6 a.m., he's running around, and only the wicked run when no one's chasing them. It's right in the Bible. So, no, sorry guys. I'm too excited, I'm going away. Okay, so it's a day we stop all work to do 4 things: to rest, worship, and delight. So plan the Sabbath around worship, not around Netflix. Netflix is good. Because, again, we don't know what it is to have nothing demanded of us. That when we finally get some time off, all we do is nothingness. We get bored. No, just plan it around worship. Worship is not a song. It could be walking with your spouse, walking with your siblings, or it could be making a good meal in Thanksgiving. It could be a song. It could be scripture. It could just plan it around worship and make sure you do some really nice things that you enjoy. Must I keep it? I think that's the wrong question. It reminds me of the question we often ask, how close to sin can I get without sinning? That's always the wrong question. We're not living in a place of musts and mustn't. Instead of wondering if you should keep it, ask yourself, God, what gift is in the Sabbath for me? Okay. How can you start? So I actually encourage you, from this moment, just pick a day where you can, and start where you can. It was a shock to my system when I did a whole 24-hour. So some of you might need to start with half a day. Pick a day and stop and rest. Don't do any work. Not because you're finished, not because you couldn't get another job, but because you are who you're loved by and not what you produce. Let us stand. And I do recognize that some of us don't own our time. So if you own your time, do it. If you don't, could we, as followers of Jesus, provide small opportunities for those around us to rest? An example is, and I'm going to be honest and say I'm not sure how much of it still continues, but at Trinity, because the security company is outsourced, so they don't have a choice when they show up. And what we told Lily is, Sunday afternoon when we're done with church, we're not expecting anyone. Take off that uniform, close the gate. Now, if you go away, they might fire you, but just sit somewhere, right? That's us saying, okay, Lord, how can we participate in bringing rest to someone who could not? And so that might look like people who have people working for them, working around them to go, okay, on Thursday, I'll do this for you so you can rest. Or, hey, because I employ you, this day take off, right? It was very important for us to even say, no, nobody works here and doesn't go on leave. Why? Because rest is part of worship. Now you see what forms our reasoning at the end of the year when we go, yep, we're going on break for 2 weeks. And some of the questions, it's okay. Some of the questions I've been asked around that time is, what about the tithes and offerings? God always provides for us. So, let's invite our prayer teams up front. If you need prayer, we'd love to pray with you. Come, Holy Spirit.